Here is the chart that I put on the board today that gives you a breakdown or a flow chart of how the verbs and the gerunds and infinitives can go together. So we talked about this idea of predicate today, right? So the concept that you have in English, we have the subject, okay, and that could be a single word like I or you, or someone's name like Susan or the teacher. Okay? And then we have the verb, and then we may or may not have an object, but we have the rest of our sentence. Okay? And everything that comes after the verb is known in English as the predicate or the predicate phase. Sorry, that's not very clear how I've written that. Let me try again. Okay? If you want to look it up, that's how it's spelled, predicate. Okay? And so the predicate phrase or the predicate pattern, which is one way that we talk about it, is determined by what this verb is. Okay, so what this verb is determines what the predicate pattern is going to be for the rest of the sentence. If it's a verb that takes an object, then there's going to be an object in the predicate pattern. Okay? If the verb doesn't take an object, then there is no object, right? So for example, the book fell. Okay? Fall doesn't take an object. Okay? We could say the book fell off the table. Okay? And here we have what's called a prepositional phrase. Okay, so we know where the book fell from. The book fell from the table or off the table, but there's no object. Okay, so when we talk about this idea of predicate in English, what we're talking about is what is the pattern that is following the verb. And as we've looked at in the past couple of lessons in class, that some of that predicate pattern has to do with whether or not a verb is followed by a gerund or an infinitive. And then what kind of gerund? Is it a passive gerund? Is it a perfect gerund? Is it a perfect passive gerund? So if you look at these numbers here, 1, 2, and 3, the example sentences that go with each of them are up here in 1, 2, and 3. So let's have a look at each of these. Okay, so in our first one, our predicate pattern, so after the verb, okay, whoops, after the verb, our predicate pattern is that we're going to have a gerund. Okay, so here's the verb right here. Okay, this happens to be a verb that's a verb plus preposition combination. You admitted to something. Okay, so the verb and the verb preposition combination tell us that what needs to follow this verb is a gerund. Okay, and so what I wanted to show you in number 1 was what's the example of a passive gerund. Okay, so we go back up here to number 1. Susan admitted to, and here's the ing, that's the gerund part. Okay, and it's the verb be because it's passive. Sorry. Something weird is happening here. Won't let me erase. There we go. Okay, so the reason that being here is because it's passive. Susan admitted to being scared of traveling alone. Okay, being scared by something of traveling alone. Okay, number 2. Here's an example of a perfect. Where am I? Perfect gerund. Sorry. Okay. So now we're coming here and looking at an example of this sentence. So number 2 is right here. Yep. Her mother is proud of, there's the perfect, having raised, that's the past participle, such a confident daughter. Okay. So her mother, that's the subject. All of this here and all of this here, this is all part of the predicate. Okay. And then we know that once we have this of in here, it's a preposition and it's followed by the gerund. we're showing an example of the perfect. So that's why having is there, and the PP is there, because this is perfect. Okay. Our last example, okay, has to do with the very last one on our column here, and that's the perfect passive right there. Okay. So number 3 up here, her mother appreciated having been called on each stage of Susan's journey. Okay. So here we've got our verb. That's the subject. Everything after the subject is that predicate phrase. So all of this. Okay. The verb determines what's going to be in the predicate phrase. So appreciated is followed by a gerund. Okay. We're giving an example here of the perfect passive gerund. So we've got having, that's the perfect. Been, that's the passive. Called, that's the PP. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3 on the gerund side of things. Okay, so let's have a look at what happens on the other side with the infinitives. Ooh, oh dear, I didn't mean to erase those numbers. Oh well, that's okay. All right, let's have a look at on this side. Let's change colors here. Okay. So here on the infinitive side, we're going to look at an infinitive passive, or a passive infinitive. So number 4, we're coming down here. Okay, the reader, whoops, that shouldn't be reader, that should be teacher. I got a little crazy on my erasing. There we go. Okay, the teacher seems to be understood by the students. Okay, there's where we split. This is our predicate. This is our subject phrase. The verb determines the predicate pattern. Seems is followed by an infinitive. Okay, and we're going to give an example of this one, the passive. So we've got seems plus an infinitive. It's in the passive form. We have the PP, it's irregular here. Okay, and we're using the passive because we have this by phrase at the end. Ooh, pink and red look terrible together. I shouldn't do that again. Sorry. Okay. All right, let's move on to number 5. Okay. Number 5, we want to show an example of a perfect infinitive. So here, the students seem to have understood the teacher. Okay. The students is the subject. Here we have all of our predicate pattern. Seem is our verb. Seem is followed by an infinitive. We're showing an example of the perfect infinitive. So there we have to have and understood as the past participle. Okay, in number 4, understood is the past participle because of passive. In number 5, understood is the past participle because of have. Our last one, number 6, talks about an example of the perfect passive infinitive. So let's look at number 6 down here. The teacher seems to have been understood. Okay, there's that subject. We know that the rest of this, all the way to the end, is our predicate phrase. The verb seems is followed by the infinitive. So we're going to follow it with to have. And we also want to follow it with a passive. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, been. Okay, and then we have the PP here as well. Okay, and that's your example of a perfect passive infinitive. I'm just going to draw some arrows here. Just clean up the space a little bit. So we've got the past participle understood because we have the passive. We have the past participle of been because we have the perfect. We have the infinitive form of the perfect because we have seems, and seems is followed by the infinitive. Okay, so one more time. The passive form is here because, oops, sorry. The past participle form is here because it's passive. Be is the passive, the word that, or the verb that's used in passive, but it's in its participle form because we have here. Have is here in the infinitive form because we have the verb seems. And seems is followed by the infinitive. Okay? And the same thing happens in the sentences above. All right, so there's your chart. Clean or messy, I don't know how you like it. Maybe I'll erase it for the final, well, maybe not. I'll leave it. You can take a picture of it as it was all nice and clean at the very beginning. Or maybe what I'll do, I'll post this picture without all the writing on it on our team drive, and you can have it there if you didn't take a picture of it in class. All right, see you tomorrow.